call the meeting to order, a special meeting of the Community Services and Land Use Committee, December 11th, 3:30. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Public notification of this meeting was published, posted, and distributed in compliance with the South Carolina Freedom of Information. Can I confirm that, Ms. Brock? Okay. I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
I'll second it.
All right, was motion made by Chairman Passman and second by Councilman Tavernet. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And I understand we have no public comment? All right, we'll get right down to the business. This is a very happy occasion, but before we go into that, since it is public comment, I'd like to remind all City of Beaufort residents that if they're a registered voter, to please vote tomorrow. It's a very important election. All right, number 6, recommend approval to fund due diligence and negotiate terms of acquisitions for the following proposed green space applications. And the chairman, Mike McShane of the Green Space Group, will walk us through this and remind us of what we're to do today only.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chairman, good afternoon, council members, committee members. Again, I'm Mike McShane, a resident of Charleston, but I have the privilege of serving as your appointee to the Green Space Committee. And today we bring forward 4 independent projects, simply seeking that first phase of asking for authorization to do the due diligence and negotiations to come back forward to this committee and therefore council before. This does not obligate either the Green Space Committee or council to move forward beyond simply just doing our due diligence and coming back with a recommendation for that. There were 5 applications submitted to the Green Space. One of the applications was deemed not complete. It was returned back to the applicant. There is an application deadline, again, this comes up in January, so they can take advantage of that opportunity. There are 4 applications that we did review last week, and we come with recommendations on all 4. Madam Chairman, is it your pleasure to take one at a time?
Yes, sir, please.
Okay. The first one being an application to acquire a conservation easement on a property in the northern part of the county known as Half Moon Island in the Lobico area. And this is one that you can see in the yellow highlighted. The pink around it displays the amount of property already under some form of protection, be it easement or some other form. This has a full commitment from our partners at Department of Defense to equal the match that the Green Space may put into that. So it's highly leveraged through that. So we seek approval to move forward on the due diligence to negotiate with the applicant and therefore the landowner on what those values would actually entail.
Could you remind council what due diligence usually encompasses?
Yes, ma'am. It's broadly, because it may filter a little bit depending on the actual application, but typically it's going to involve everything from an appraisal to be reviewed, as well as due diligence and property description, legal description, making sure ownership is correct, environmental phase 1, and if needed, any further recommendations based on that phase 1, et cetera.
Thank you. I have a motion.
Also, does it include surveying as well?
For the most part, unless there's not been a survey provided, yes, sir, it would include that. And if I may just add, that then plays a little bit of role on the time of when your Green Space Committee will then review that information based on when we receive that. We're at a time of year that I think for those least experience has been on some appraisals are taking sometimes 6 weeks or more
Madam Chair,
to receive.
you asked for a motion for approval?
Yes, and then we
So-
can have discussion and questions.
So moved.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All right.
I have a
All right,
question.
question, I think Logan had his hand up first.
Yep, go ahead.
My question was, we talked about that it's being split through the Department of Defense. Are they gonna be splitting due diligence costs as well, or just the purchase of the property if we decide to follow through, or the easement, I should say?
I'll confirm this, Mr. Cunningham, but I believe Department of Defense actually helps do that. They've actually done some of the work. And if we can accept some of that work as parallel to the work we would request, then that actually would save the county some of that.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Tabernick?
I was gonna, well, I could wait till after, but I was gonna ask for the audience who might be listening. Can you talk about the difference between a conservation easement versus a fee simple, because these are different? So
Sure.
people
Happy
know.
to. The conservation easement will be held by typically a qualified nonprofit third party. The ownership of the land remains privately held. Therefore, the management costs, et cetera, are retained by the ownership. And the easement will enforce those negotiations that have taken place on what restrictions have been placed under that easement. That easement is a negotiation, not a regulation, so therefore they'll vary from property to property. But it's typically going to have a restriction on the number of subdivisions that could take place or the number of structures that can be built on the property. Fee simple is actually taking clear ownership. In the case the county potentially could take ownership of a project that then would take that property off the tax rolls, i.e. the conservation easement property remains on the tax rolls. That's one of the significant differences
Okay,
there.
thank you.
Are there any other questions before we, without objection? Any
Are we-
objection?
Well, are we gonna go through the other four first?
No, we're gonna do them individually, because they're all different.
Oh, we are? Okay.
That's good.
All right, so this one is for Half Moon. That was the motion that Councilman Dawson made and was seconded by Councilman York. Glover?
Yeah, listen, I just want to make this comment. I'm glad to see this property come forward. It's been on the radar for over 5-6 years, so I'm glad to see this property come forward. The air station has been, the military has been really after this property for some,
Is there no pun intended that has been on their radar?
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions or comments? All right, without objection, this one will go forward for due diligence.
And of course, we will bring back a recommendation on each one of these back to this committee and therefore to council before we do move forward with anything. The second one is also conservation easement, and Madam Chairman, a little excitement for me tonight is that your committee is getting to see some things that really are unique in your program. The fact that we can come to ask for due diligence on a property outside your county. This will be the first time in the state that a county is willing to even consider putting money in a property outside the county. And so, frankly, my view, and you can see on this map, and if you can go to the next one that shows the significance of what is in its surrounding neighborhood, and in particular, if you look at the water frontage on that, you're really protecting a water resource that's vitally important to this county. And it's highly leveraged. It's an easement. The ownership is in transition. This gentleman is selling this, but he has allowed conservation to step in and take a significantly reduced price than what he's already been offered to sell otherwise. So I give compliments to the owner for considering that. And the county has been asked, and in this case, under the ordinance, we would be looking for a minimum of a 300% match from outside the county. We've exceeded that on this property. The values on this property so the values that we will most likely be bringing back, substantiated by our due diligence, will surpass that requirement that we have to do that.
Okay, I'd like to entertain a motion and a second, and then we can have questions.
So moved, Madam Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Councilman Cunningham. And Councilman Ms. Glover, second. All right, let's open it up for questions.
Sure.
Yeah,
So I assume that talks have already been had with Jasper County, is that correct?
And part of our process is that we have to solicit that any of those political subdivisions have to be aware that I'm here in front of you tonight asking for that, yes, sir.
And were they supportive so far
They're,
in the talks? or-
they're supportive in terms of what they can articulate, but
understand.
I think this type of property will be an example for why their county ought to also give consideration to doing something similar to what you're doing.
is everyone pretty familiar where this is off of I-95 from the maps? Okay, want to make sure.
Who's holding the easement? on this
The
one?
Nature Conservancy.
As in the National Nature Conservancy?
Yes, ma'am, they have
Okay.
each state has a chapter, so
Right,
their
they do.
chapter, and they're well
This
qualified
is
to
out of
do.
Arlington, Virginia by any chance?
Each state
That's
has
their,
their own.
that's their national headquarters.
You're right, exactly. Okay, but this is out of what, Georgia or?
No.
It's actually, their chapter is based in, I think their office now is in Mount Pleasant, but it is
Oh,
a
it
South
is?
Carolina
Oh, okay, I
chapter.
didn't realize that. Okay, thanks.
But you're right, they're all part of the national,
Okay,
yeah, the national.
all right.
Yeah,
Yes.
you're right.
That's huge.
And for what it's worth, the state is looking at also entertaining, putting value into this as well. So these dollars are highly leveraged. This actually is a poster child of a project to do this, like this one.
Any other questions? Okay. Without objection, we'll go forward for due diligence on, how, is it Gregory or
Gregory.
Gregory, okay, neck track.
And for me, just for full disclosure, my middle name is that name, spelled that very way. So I was pleased to see that there, and it does come from an old family connection there. The next two are fee simple acquisitions. We'll take the first one, which is Ulmer Road, and this council's quite familiar with this project. You asked that the green space allow that the owner put in an application, which is done. They've met the qualifications, and we're asking for authority to move forward on due diligence as described before on this particular project.
Okay, do I entertain a motion?
So moved, Madam Chair.
All right, Councilman Cunningham, a second to go forward.
I'll second it.
All right. Any questions or discussion?
Just one question. Will we be able to use the same, to save dollars, our assessments that we used a couple months ago, or are we gonna have to do
It's a-
new ones?
Very fair question. What I'd like to see if the committee would accept, and if we can do this, is to maybe have that appraisal just reviewed so that you minimize the additional expense. And that's oftentimes something that we can do, is use an update in the existing appraisal.
Any other questions?
Actually, yes, going back to that, the appraisal, somebody had tossed around at one of the last meetings about this, that we need to do a conservation appraisal or a different type of appraisal than the commercial aspect. Is there a legitimate difference in that, or?
There are legitimate differences in that, but what you're authorizing tonight is the ability for the green space to even contract and discuss how that appraisal process will move forward.
All right, without objection, we'll go forward with due diligence for the Ulmer Road track. And the fourth and last one.
If you will
Mitchellville
show
Road.
the Mitchellville track on Hilton Head, thank you. This is in the town of Hilton Head. This is an application made by the town of Hilton Head on a 26-acre tract that we're seeking authorization to engage on this due diligence. There are some questions that still need to be resolved, and that will come up during the due diligence period, including some of the legal description, et cetera. This is historically owned by an African-American family. It's one of the last tracts that has been continuously owned by that family since the Civil War. And it's got about 450 plus or minus feet right there. You can see a beachfront. I had a chance to go and just physically see it because I don't get to Hilton Head as often as I used to become familiar. The town has a park. You can see it right there in that Fish Hall Park. Great resources right there. It's one of the last, frankly, pristine maritime forest that goes right up to the water. What?
Yes,
There's a representative that showed up late to speak to this property.
oh, for public comment? Oh, okay.
I'll be very brief then. So our request is simply to have the ability to have a discussion and to do some due diligence. Based on that, we would come back with a recommendation either to move forward or something else.
Okay,
Can I make that motion? for you?
yes, please. Second?
I second his motion.
Thank
All right,
you.
we have a second.
Listen, I've walked this property.
You
It is
have?
absolutely beautiful
Oh, really?
and it's
Stunning piece of property.
unreal. Michael,
We do want to let a representative make some public comment. Let's do that as part of the discussion unless there's some other questions or, do you have some?
Yeah.
Cunningham? Mhm.
I know you said you have a lot of discussions on this one, unlike the other three. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, Mr. Cunningham.
I know you said you have a lot of discussion that needs to be had on this property compared to the other three. I guess one of my questions is there interest in this being developed with everything that's surrounding it currently? With Mitchellville already there and with the town of Hilton Head owning land right next door, is this something that we know we can get enough matching funds on for this type of return, or is this something that Hilton Head should be looking at to do? I guess that's one of my questions about it, because it's a very tight, narrow piece of land. Yes, I know there can be quite a bit built on there. This looks like there's apartments or condos right next to it. I mean, I've been to Mitchellville Park, but not necessarily down to the other park. So I guess those would just be some questions. It looks more like town of Hilton Head. It could be property that they could use a little bit better than us in a conservation.
So a broad answer to that is that allowing us to move forward in that due diligence allows us to speak to the applicant, which is the town of Hilton Head, and to then seek what other opportunities there may be to retain matching funds. I suggest that this, from my experience, strongly would be compelling for other funds to be also applied to on this.
So you said the applicant was the town of Hilton Head?
The town of Hilton Head itself.
So they own this currently?
No, sir.
No.
They
No,
just
no, no,
applied
no,
on
no.
their behalf?
No, in your
Okay.
process, you allowed someone to make an application, even if they weren't the owner of
Right.
the property, to give thought to how then they may be a participant in negotiating. This goes back to that fee simple versus conservation easement. Even on the conservation easements, the owners identify that they're well aware of that application being made on their specific property.
Okay.
There are some diligence that we need to get answered on this particular property.
Okay,
Thank you.
if there's no, I'd like the person that came in to come forward and state his name.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, yes.
Come, sir, if you can come on forward and state your name, and we'll like to hear before we vote to do due diligence.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Attorney Charles Houston. I represent the defendant heirs who own this property on Hilton Head. The first thing I want to establish is that this was not something that the town took up on its own initiative. They were prompted to do this by a real estate broker. Okay? The second thing is I understand the ordinance. In order to even consider the purchase of a property, the property has to have fee simple title. This property does not have fee simple title. There are 4 open estates pertaining to this property. So therefore, there is no fee simple title that the seller or the buyer could obtain if the council were to entertain buying the property. The third thing, as you mentioned before, this is a very unique property. The minority heirs want to purchase it themselves. This matter is tied up now before the Master in Equity and before the South Carolina Court of Appeals to have certain issues resolved as to, under the Pinckney Act, for the minority owners to purchase the interests of the majority owners. And all of this is basically a subterfuge and an effort to thwart our effort to buy out the other heirs. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. I appreciate you giving me the
Well,
time.
thank you, and we'll enter that into the record for public comment. And Chairman McShane, would you like to make a comment? before
Yes,
we-
ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just I think the committee is aware that this is classically an heirs property issue. We're going to see this on a routine basis because frankly, they're some of the most threatened properties out there in terms of what your objectives are on the green space. And part of the due diligence would be to make sure that we could, in fact, come with a recommendation to be able to acquire or ease it, frankly, even if that were the case. And so I'm talking in general terms. Specifically to this property, I'm aware that there's some, less pendants was filed and there's some litigation going on. That will have to obviously be resolved before we come back
Yes.
with a recommendation on
Before
that.
it comes back. Okay, any other, without objection, can we go forward with due diligence on this? And knowing that it may be a while before we hear anything back on this one.
And I certainly would offer to council and to this committee, if they'd like to have just regular updates as we progress through that, I'm happy to do that as well.
That'd be great.
Great.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
We-
because I think there's high interest in, and I understand the high interest in this particular.
And we
case.
want to remind the public, in January, is another deadline for more applications. And I want to thank you and all the staff's hard work on this and the committee to
Thank
get
you
to
for,
this
and if I
point.
could, just to you and to your colleagues, the staff, particularly Mark Davis and Chuck Atkinson, excuse me, Chuck, and Rob Marchant, et cetera, have been very, very, very supportive.
We're breaking new ground.
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you. Okay, I need a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
I think you need to probably pass this
Oh,
motion.
well, I said without
We
did?
objection. Yeah, I
Oh,
did
we
say
don't
without
without
objection.
objection.
I'll say it
Without
again.
objection.
Yeah.
No, I didn't hear that part, that's all, yeah.
All right, I need a
Okay.
motion to go into executive
So
session.
moved. Second.
Second? All right.
Can we say the reason for it, please?
Oh, sure. I'd be glad to. Discussion of negotiations incident to proposed contractual arrangements and proposed sale or purchase of real property, 76 May River Road. And we're going in there. All set up for us. Should not take, yes, ma'am? What, you couldn't hear me?
Who seconded?
Oh, Larry did. Mhm. Oh, okay.
Hang on.
Logan's making the motion and. I think so. All right, are we back? Okay. We are back in session. We do have matters arising out of executive session. We have a motion concerning the proposed contractual arrangements and proposed sale or purchase of real properties at 76 May River. Recommendation. Did I hear a motion?
Yes, ma'am, Madam Chairman. I move that we forward to council a recommendation to authorize the county administrator to pursue negotiations to purchase 76 May River Road on the terms which were discussed in executive session this afternoon.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
A second by Councilman Glover. I think we need a roll call vote for this. All right. Councilman Cunningham,
Yes.
Councilman Glover.
Yes.
Hold on 1 second, I was getting
You
it.
gonna call the rest of them? Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Clever. Councilmember Reeds,
Yes.
Councilmember Brown,
No.
Councilmember Tabernick,
No,
Councilmember Bartholomew,
Yes.
Councilmember Dawson,
Yes.
Vice Chair McKellen,
Yes.
Chairman Passament,
Yes.
Committee Chair Howard.
Yes.
The motion passes.
All right. Thank you. We are adjourned. Next meeting, what time, Chairman?